The Makkahs in Mitzrayim got progressively worse over time. And presumably, as they continued to go on, they continued to intensify and become more severe. The ninth Makkah, the penultimate Makkah right before the Makkah of Makkah's Bechiris, of death itself, was the Makkah of Choshech, of darkness, which implies that the Makkah of Choshech was quite a severe punishment in its own right. What was so difficult about being stuck in the dark for a few days? And Chedush Harim explains that it's because the pasuk describes the Makkah of Choshech as v'lo ro ish es achiv lo kama ish mitachlev shloishes yamim, that the people were not able to see each other or to get up to help one another for a period of 3 days. And the Chedush Harim derives from here that the Makkah of Choshech was so severe because each person was isolated, confined, quarantined all by themselves. That kind of solitude, that kind of isolation can be quite a difficult experience, second only to the Makkah of Makkah's Bechiris, to death itself. And therefore, as we find ourselves now in a time of isolation, where we are trapped, most of us in our own homes, that is a period of great darkness, of great difficulty, which of course we are all struggling through together, and perhaps brings us here together tonight. However, perhaps the Haggadah, particularly the opinion of Rabbi Mikvah and his attitude, can provide us with some measure of light, some measure of guidance and optimism through this very dark and period of choshech and difficult period. Of course, the Haggadah tells us towards the beginning of the Haggadah of the Ma'aseh of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azai, Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Tar from the 5 Tanoim, who were having a Seder together in Bnei Brak. And they were continuing to regale themselves in the story of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim all the way into the morning, until those students informed them that Rabbi Seinu Higia Zman Kriyash Mashal Shachris. However, the Maritzchias in his commentary of Masechtas Sanhedrin asks, why were they in Bnei Brak? After all, Rabbi Kiva was a Talmud of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Elazar, and Bnei Brak was his hometown. Why were his Rebbeim, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azai, Rabbi Tarfon, his contemporary, why were they in Bnei Brak at the house of their Talmud? Why weren't they in their own homes? And Aruch HaShulchan explains in his Haggadah, the Leil Shimurim, that it's because these Tanoim lived in the period immediately following the Churban Bayis Sheni, which was a period of great darkness, of great difficulty. And the other Tanoim were unable to figure out how can we possibly, in this climate, celebrate a Seder, a time of Geula, of redemption, when they were living through a period of Galos, of great darkness, and of great exile. However, they went to the house of Rabbi Kiva, because Rabbi Kiva had a resilient optimism that was unyielding even in the face of the most difficult circumstances. And they went to his house to figure out how they could learn from that optimism, to adopt some of it themselves, and perhaps celebrate a Seder together. For that very same reason, the Mishnah tells us in Masechtas Psachim, when the Tanoim are debating what should the Nusach of the Bracha be at the conclusion of Magid, a section of the Haggadah, Reb Tarfon's opinion is that the Nusach of the Bracha should be Asher Go'alanu v'Go'as Aveiseinu miMitzrayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who took us out and our forefathers out from Mitzrayim. But there's no mention of a Geula Hasida, of a future redemption, only thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the redemption in the past. Because perhaps Reb Tarfon was unable to see in the dark days in which he was living in the shadow of the Churban Bayis Sheni, he was unable to muster a conception of what the Binyan Bayis Shlishi would look like. However, even in that climate, Rabbi Kiva argued that the nusach of the brach at the end of Magid, at the end of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, is Kein Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Aveiseinu, Yigienu L'Moadim L'Gam Acherim. Just like we're celebrating this Yom Tov, may we be zeicher to celebrate other Yom Tovim in the future. Habam L'Karseinu L'Shalom Smeichim B'Vinyan Yirecha, rejoicing in the building of Yerushalayim, V'Sasim B'Vaydasecha, the renewal of the Avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. May we be zeicher to celebrate the eating of the karbanos, performing the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. Even in those difficult days, when the Galus was first setting in, the Beis Hamikdash was still burning. Rabbi Kiva was able to see the hope for a better future, even in that kind of darkness. And this was his attitude. In many different, we find this attitude echoed or reinforced Rabbi Kiva in many other places as well. The Gemara tells us at the end of Masechtas Makos that once these same 4 Tanoim, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azai, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Kiva, were strolling on the Makom HaMikdash, after it had already been destroyed, and they were walking by the ruins, and they saw a fox running out of the ruins of the Beis HaMikdash, which was a fulfillment of the Nevuah of Yirmiyahu Hanavi of Al Tzion Sheshamim Shualim Halchuba, and therefore the other Tanoim began to cry because they saw the fulfillment of the Nevuah of the Churban Beis HaMikdash. However, Rabbi Akiva began to laugh. How could Rabbi Akiva be laughing? When they just witnessed the Churban Beis HaMikdash, there was a fox that was running through the ruins of the holiest place on earth, and the Nevuahs of all the destruction of Yerushalayim was being fulfilled. How could Rabbi Akiva find the strength to laugh at that moment? Rabbi Akiva explained, because if this Nevuah of the Galus is coming true, then the Nevuah of the Geula is ensured, is guaranteed as well. The Nevuah of Zechariah, Vod Yeshu, Zekenu, Zekenos, Yerushalayim, it would be Zayich to see the elderly men and women strolling through the streets of Yerushalayim. In the midst of that destruction, Rabbi Akiva saw light, he saw optimism, he saw the potential, the seeds of a Geula. The Gemara tells us in Masechtas Menachos as well, that Rabbi Akiva was able to darshan mikol koitz v'koitz, from every one of the crowns on top of the letters in the Sefer Torah, tilei tilim shel halachas, reams and reams, volumes and volumes of halachas. Why was it only Rabbi Akiva who was able to learn volumes out of the crowns, the tagim, the koitzim, on the top of the letters of the Sefer Torah? And perhaps it's because the word koitz also means thorns, things that are difficult, that stick us, that harm us. So the other Tanaim weren't able to see halachas in koitzim, in thorns. But Rabbi Akiva, with his optimistic attitude that was unyielding and resilient, was able to see tilei tilim shel halachas. He was able to derive svarim, reams, and volumes of halachas, even from the most difficult situations, even those that can be described as thorns. It's a medrash that we're familiar with from Purim that wasn't so long ago, even though it feels like years ago. But there was a medrash that comes up in the context of Purim, and similarly in Parshas Chayei Sarah, where the medrash tells us that once Rabbi Akiva was giving a class to his Talmidim, and they began to doze, they began to fall asleep. So in order to arouse them, Rabbi Akiva told them a gematria. He told them, you know, why is it that Esther was able to rule over 127 Medinas? Was in the schus of Sarah Imenu, who lived to be 127 years old. The first question the Mefarshim ask is, how could it be that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva were falling asleep? Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 Talmidim. He was clearly a dynamic and charismatic leader and teacher. How could it be that his Talmidim were falling asleep in the middle of his shir? It's not fathomable. But moreover, how did Rabbi Akiva awaken them? How did he arouse them? By telling them a gematria. Usually when you introduce math into a class, people do not begin to wake up more. But some people, just begin to then fall asleep the minute you mention numbers. How is it that this gematria was able to wake up the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva? And perhaps the answer is Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim were not falling asleep. They were becoming disinterested. They were disheartened. They were living in a time of Churban Beis HaMikdash. The walls of Yerushalayim were literally and figuratively burning around them. And Rabbi Akiva wanted to sit and have shir. He said, Rabbi, how can we learn in the midst of everything that's going on, in the midst of all this bahoa, of all this confusion and displacement and disorientation? You want us to be able to focus now on our regular learning? Let's go back to shir on the next daf. How are we going to be able to do that in the midst of all of this destruction? Rabbi Akiva was able to see through all of that with his optimism, and he was encouraging them, no, we have to continue. And his source of inspiration was from Sarah Imenu and Esther. Because the pasuk describes Sarah at the beginning of Parshas Chayei Sarah. Vayu Chayei Sarah, Sarah's life was Me'ah Shana ve'esim Shana ve'sheva Shanim, 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. Shnei Chayei Sarah, these were the years of Sarah's life. Why does the pasuk repeat the phrase Shnei Chayei Sarah twice? So Rashi explains in order to teach us that Kulan Shavan L'Taiva, Sarah's life from the beginning to the end was equally good, equally positive. She didn't have any challenges in life. That's not true. What do you mean Kula and Shavan and Taiva? Sarah had a very difficult life. She was childless to the age of 90. She was taken hostage not once, but twice. Her husband married a co-wife who was able to conceive almost immediately. Hagar, of course, had Yishmael. And then, even when she was finally able to have a child, that child almost became sacrificed as a carbon to the Rebbeinu Shalom. She almost lost him. Sarah had a very difficult life. What does it mean, Kula and Shavan L'Taiva? Explains this Sfas Emes. What it means is, she had this midah of hishtavus hanevesh, of equanimity, of calmness, even in the face of a storm, even in the face of difficulty. Sarah was able to remain calm and to continue to grow even from the most difficult of circumstances. And this is not only a midah that we find by Sarah Imenu, but it's something that we find even by Esther as well. Esther was able to continue to lead the Jewish people even in a time of great Hester Panim. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name is not mentioned throughout the Megillah Esther, she was able to continue to work, to achieve, to grow, to build and strengthen the Jewish people even in a time of Hester Panim. Where did she get that strength from? From Sarah Imenu, who had this kulan shavan l'taiva, this midah of hishtavus hanefesh, of equanimity, even in the face of great difficulty and great challenges. And this was a midah that was actually found by all of the Avos as well. Where Naftali of Ravshitz writes in the Sefer Zera Kodesh that each one of the Avos had a letter that at one time or another was added to their name. Of course, Avram's original name was Avram without a hey. But then Avram had later on in his life had a hey that was added to his name. Yitzchak's name is spelled Yud Tzadi, Yud Ches, Yud Tzadi, Ches and Kuf. However, the pasuk in Tehillim changes Yitzchak's name somewhat. Asher karas it's Avraham u'shvu asoi Yitzchak, not Yud Tzadi's Ches and Kuf, but Yud Shin, Ches and Kuf. So instead of the Tzadi, it's sometimes interchanged with the Shin. And of course, Yaakov Avinu's name appears 5 times throughout the Chumash with a Molei Vav. Yaakov, not Yud Ayin Kuf Beis, but Yud Ayin Kuf Vav Beis. So Yaakov Avinu, on occasion, has a Vav that's added to his name. Yitzchak, one time in Sefer Tehillim, his name is changed from Yitzchak to Asher Karas Avraham Shmuel Li Yitzchak, from a Tzadi to a Shin. And of course, Avram Avinu has the Hey that's added to his name. So if you put these 3 letters together, you have a Vav, a Shin, and a Hey, which says, of Naftali of Ravshitz, if we rearrange these letters, it spells the word Shaveh, equal. Because each one of the Yavas, just like Sarah Imenu, had this attitude of Kulan Shavim L'Taiva, of Hishtavas HaNefesh, of equanimity. They were able to grow even in times of great darkness. They were able to maintain optimism and to see it as an opportunity. Every challenge is an opportunity to come closer to the Rebbeinu Shalom, to strengthen themselves and the larger Jewish community. And Mir Hashem, we should have that same attitude. As we find ourselves somewhat in a period of isolation, of darkness, of Cheshech, to have the optimism, to learn from the optimism of the Leil HaSeder, of course, of Rebbe Kiva and of the others that preceded us. One of the challenges, of course, that we're confronting on a practical level, very pragmatic, we're confronting now as a community as the religious life begins to become deconstructed somewhat, as the schools are closed and the shuls are not active. So one of the challenges has become Tevilas Keilim as well. There are certain communities, my community, Baruch Hashem, on the Upper West Side, where the Mikvah for Tevilas Keilim continues to be open, particularly because the water now is chlorinated, and according to the CDC and their guidance, that if the water is chlorinated, so then the water is safe and one doesn't have to be afraid of catching the virus from the water. However, there is still a concern that within the Mikvah chamber itself, there could be overcrowding of many people rushing to do Tevilas Keilim prior to Pesach. So we have a system, as do other mikvahs, that you have to get buzzed in one at a time. We're able to maintain that, that you have to get admitted with permission, and there won't be any overcrowding that takes place in the mikvah. And that's why our mikvah continues to be open, as is the case in other communities. However, if you're in a community where that is not possible, so certain Rabbanim have taken the precaution, where it's not possible to maintain that kind of population control in the mikvah chamber, have taken the precaution of closing the mikvah, which of course creates somewhat of a difficulty for those who are making Pesach now for the first time, particularly if they were expecting to be away and were not planning for this contingency, and now have to find themselves buying new Keilim. How are they supposed to go about the mitzvah of Tevilas Keilim, which of course presents a great challenge? So the best option, if the mikvah is closed, is of course to find a natural mikvah, such as the ocean, or certain natural bodies of water, certain lakes, which are natural lakes and fit for Tevilas Keilim. So that would, of course, be the best option, to go to one of those bodies of water. If it's not too much of a difficulty, it's not too far away, and you're able to arrange it. And of course, if one does go to these kinds of bodies of water, he has to make sure to submerge the kli entirely underneath the water, which if you're going to the ocean, which means you might have to walk a step or two into the water in order to get it entirely submerged beneath the water. If that is not an option, to find a natural body of water, so of course the second best possibility would be to use as much as possible disposable Keilim, because anything that's disposable, even if it's made out of a metal, since it's disposable, it's only made for one-time use, is not Makabel Tumah, it doesn't accept Tumah, and therefore would not require Tevilas Keilim. So that is, of course, the second best option. If neither one of those are an option, of course, it's not going to work. You can't run an entire kitchen with, you can find pans perhaps that are disposable, not necessarily pots or other items that are essential for the kitchen. And let's say you don't live near a natural body of water, or simply not possible, or will be overly difficult to get there. So then one will, what other possibilities are there before us with regards to the mitzvah of Tevilas Keilim if the mikvah is closed in one's particular community? So aside from the mitzvah of Tevilas Keilim, which is found in the pasuk of Parshas Matos, when Klal Yisrael conquered the Midyanim and took their Keilim, so the pasuk tells us the kol davar sheyava ba'esh taviru ba'esh v'taher, any item that was used with macholas asuris, with non-kosher food, while it was hot. So in order, one has to first kasher the kli, one has to remove the flavor of the non-kosher food that is embedded in the walls of the kli. That's the process of hechsher kelim. But even after you kasher the keli, the pasuk says, "V'kol asher lo yavu ba'esh taviru b'mayim." Even if it wasn't used with hot machalas asuros, with hot non-kosher food, where the flavor got embedded within the walls of the kli, nonetheless, one first has to also put it in the mikvah. You have to toivel the kelim, and what kind of tefillah does it require, and what kind of body of water? Kol asher lo yavu ba'esh taviru b'mayim. You have to put it in the water. So the pasuk tells us, it has to be in the same waters that a nida would be toivel b'hem, which means it has to be in a kosher mikvah. So before one would use the kelim that they took from the Midyanim, not only did you have to kasher the kli, but first they would have to do Tevilas Keilim as well. Aside though from the mitzvah of Tevilas Keilim, Chazal, which is arguably midoraisa, based on the pasuk in Parshas Matos, it's arguably biblical. Because of that pasuk, the Gemara tells us in Masechtas Avodah Zarah that Chazal established an iser, a prohibition to use the keli, to use the utensil prior to immersing it in the mikvah. Presumably as a motivation in order that we should fulfill the mitzvah. So prior to fulfilling the mitzvah, one is not permitted to use the kli, even one single time. There's a misconception out there that if you buy a kli, you get one free pass from Tevilas Keilim. You can use it once without being toivel the kli. Of course, that is a misconception. It is based on something legitimate, but the two cases are not analogous. It's because when one buys a kli that contains food in it when you buy it, let's say I buy a drink that comes in a glass bottle, but it comes and I buy it together with the drink, or I buy a candy dish and it's from the local gift shop, the kosher gift shop, and it comes together with candy. So even though the dish itself might require Tevilas Keilim, if it's glass, of course, China does not require Tevilas Keilim, but if it's glass or metal and it comes together with candy that's inside of it, so the Pais can tell us, the Chalkes Yaakov, the Mariel Diskin, Sridei Yesh, the one is permitted to eat the candy off the dish, one is permitted to drink the beverage without first toiveling the kli, because it comes together with the kli. So that's not considered to be actively using the kli. I'm just removing the food passively from the kli, from the utensil. It came together with candy, it came together with a beverage. I'm permitted to drink the beverage. I don't have to, throw it out right away and then put it back in after I do Tevilas Keilim. Since it came together with the beverage, I'm permitted to use or to eat the food that's in the utensil without first doing Tevilas Keilim, because that's considered to be passive, because I'm just taking the food out. But to put food in the kli, even one time would never be permitted. So even to use the kli once prior to Tevilas Keilim would not only be an abdication of the mitzvah of Tevilas Keilim, but would be in violation of the Isur Midrabanan of using a kli prior to doing Tevilas Keilim. However, as we said, the prohibition of the Chazal established to use a kli prior to doing Tevilas Keilim is presumably in order to encourage us to do the mitzvah. So therefore, one could argue if the possibility to do the mitzvah doesn't exist, perhaps the Isur should not exist either. The Ramah tells us in Hilchos Tevilas Keilim that if one buys a kli together in partnership together with a non-Jew, so then the utensil does not require Tevilas Keilim, even though it's made out of glass or metal, which would typically require Tevilas Keilim. Since it's bought in a partnership together with a non-Jew, it doesn't require Tevilas Keilim. Why not? So the Shach quotes in the name of the Isur V'Heter, one of the Rishonim, that the reason is because even if you'll do Tevilas Keilim, you'll still have part of the kli which still remains, which still belongs to the non-Jew. So the Tevilas Keilim will only help for part of the kli; it won't help for the other part of the kli. The Ritva tells us in the name of the Yushalmi that the reason why we have a mitzvah of Tevilas Keilim is because we have to be Megayer the Keilim. We have to distance the utensils from the harmful influence of the Machalas Asuras, of the tray food that was cooked in them in the past, and to convert them now to become Jewish Keilim. So says the Isur V'Heter, how can you convert the Keilim to become Jewish Keilim? If you own the Keilim, you own the utensil together in a partnership with a non-Jew, it remains partially owned by the non-Jew. So that part will never be converted. So your Tevilas Keilim will not be effective in converting the Keilim, in converting the utensil to become Jewish Keilim. So therefore, you're not required to do Tevilas Keilim. However, the Beis Meir asks on the Shach, quoting in the name of this Beheter, that the reason why a kli that's own b'shuta to the non-Jew is part from Tevilas Keilim because the Tevilas Keilim won't be effective. Well, if the Tevilas Keilim won't be effective, maybe you just can't use the kli at all. Maybe it remains prohibited to use the kli because of that. The fact that you get the Tevilas Keilim won't be effective in converting the Keilim. Why? Just because it's not possible to do it, should that make it permitted all of a sudden now to use it without Tevilas Keilim? So Shlomo Zalman explains in a Sefer Madonna Yeretz and Hilchos Shvius that it must be, according to the Ramah and the Yisrael Heter, that when the possibility of doing Tevilas Keilim does not exist to fulfill the mitzvah, so the Iser of using the kli prior to immersion in the mikvah also does not exist. That's why some poskim are of the opinion, with Shechter, Shlita, as well as others, that if you have electrical Keilim, where it's just not possible to do Tevilas Keilim, because you're not able to submerge it in the water. If you submerge it in the water, it will be dangerous, or the kli will break, such as, let's say, a Shabbos urn or certain coffee makers. So then, since the possibility for doing Tevilas Keilim doesn't exist, the Iser, the prohibition midrabanan, to use it prior to Tevilas Keilim also does not exist. Chazal only instituted it to encourage us, to motivate us to perform the mitzvah of Tevilas Keilim. But if the possibility of doing Tevilas Keilim on this item, on this utensil doesn't exist, then the Iser to use it prior to Tevilas Keilim similarly falls away and would not apply either. However, that's not analogous to our situation. It's not comparable. The two are not really the same. See, in that situation, it's simply not possible to do Tevilas Keilim on that utensil, either because it's owned in a partnership with a non-Jew, or because if you submerge it in the water, it will break. We're dealing with utensils that can be submerged in the water, just the mikvah is closed. So that's not really the same case. I don't think we could apply the same argument in our situation, that since the possibility for performing tefillah doesn't exist, the prohibition of using the Keilim prior to Tevilas Keilim doesn't exist, because our Keilim, it is possible to tevel them. Tevilas Keilim could apply, just we don't have a mikvah open in our community. So the two situations are not necessarily the same. So I don't think we could apply that logic, that argument to our situation. So what can we do if the mikvah is closed and the natural bodies of water, which are kosher for Tevilas Keilim, are too far away, and it's simply not possible to run a whole entire kitchen with disposable Keilim? What are the possibilities that we have before us? So the Shulchan Aruch tells us in Hilchos Tevilas Keilim that if one lives in a community which does not have a mikvah, so then what he can do is be makna, he can transfer ownership of his Keilim to a non-Jew, and then borrow the Keilim back and use them while they're in the ownership of the non-Jew. That's not really that practical of a solution for many of us either, because where are we going to find non-Jews to purchase all of our Keilim, and how are we going to arrange a sale with a non-Jew? It's going to be difficult enough to arrange a Mechira Slamitz this year. How are we going to arrange every single person to sell their pots and pans to a non-Jew and then borrow them back? Will be quite cumbersome and difficult. But however, there is one other possibility that's mentioned in Sefer Tevilas Keilim in the name of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. That is that perhaps we can be mafkir the Keilim, we can renounce our ownership in the Keilim, and use them as ownerless Keilim. If they're ownerless, they don't really belong to us, they belong to no one. So then, since they don't belong to a Jew, the mitzvah of Tevilas Keilim would not apply, and then we can kind of use them in their state of being ownerless. What if we bought them already? So how are we going to do that? So we'll declare it as ownerless. If that's the case, why didn't the Shulchan Aruch mention, though, this possibility when he was discussing what should one do in a situation where there's no mikvah in the town? So the Shulchan Aruch said, well, be mafkir the Keilim to transfer ownership of the Keilim to the non-Jew. Why was that his only possibility? Why didn't he bring up, if this is in fact a valid avenue to pursue, that we could just relinquish our ownership of the Keilim and use them as ownerless Keilim? Why didn't the Shulchan Aruch bring that up as a possibility as well? So Shlomo Zalman suggests that perhaps it's because it's not the best option. It perhaps is only valid b'shas adchak in a situation of great difficulty, because right after you're going to be mafkir the Keilim and declare it as ownerless, I'm going to pick it up and put it back in my kitchen and start using it. So how can I really claim with any sincerity that I'm really using it as an ownerless kli when it's sitting in my kitchen right after I declared it as ownerless? So it's not the best option, but Rosh Zalman accepts it that b'shas adchak, perhaps this could be a valid possibility to declare the Keilim as ownerless. It says in Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat, if you bought the Keilim already, if I haven't bought it yet, so when I buy it, I don't have intention to acquire ownership of it, and it never became mine. So that, of course, would be the easiest possibility. But if I already bought it, already became mine, then I would have to relinquish and renounce my ownership in it. So the Shulchan Aruch says in order to do that, in Choshen Mishpat, you have to do it in the presence of 3 people, all of whom are not from your Bnei Bayis, they're not from members of your household who are, soymech al shulchano, who rely on you for support. It have to be 3 other people. One who could then acquire ownership of the keli, and 2 other individuals to testify to the fact that you declared it as ownerless. So those 2 individuals have to be kosher witnesses, have to be valid witnesses and not related to you, and preferably adult males. And the other party could be the one who would then acquire it. So 2 kosher liados, and you really need 3 people in total. However, the poskim are of the opinion in today's climate. This is literally dvarim ha'omdim al ha'perek, things that are coming out today in conversations with Reb Shechter Shlita and many other poskim, are of the opinion that this is something that can be permitted on the phone. If you'll dial up 3 people in a conference call and announce relinquishing your ownership in these Keilim, the required Tevilas Keilim, and you inform them if anyone would like to come and acquire them, they're free to do so, and they'll be unencumbered in that process. And you declare them as ownerless, and you intend to only use them in that context as ownerless Keilim. And this is something that could be effected over the phone, perhaps even on the internet in some kind of Zoom session, perhaps even on a chat if you announce it, if there's enough people that are there and that are aware of your statement. This is a possible avenue that one could explore in order to relinquish ownership of the Keilim and perhaps avoid the mitzvah of Tevilas Keilim. Of course, though, one would have to mean this b'leiv shalem. You'd have to really mean it. I once heard from Rabbi Yaakov Haber Shlita, who's a Rebbe in Chappelle's, he used to be a Rebbe in Yeshiva University, that once Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, in order to avoid Tevilas Keilim on some of the appliances which were unable to be submersed in the water, he used them in his house as hefker. He declared them as hefker, as ownerless, and he used them in his kitchen as ownerless. However, one Purim, the Bachram came over to the house, and they wanted to pray a Purim joke on the Rosh Hashiva and Rav Aaron, Zeichat Tzadik Avracha, so they took all the appliances, they're hefker, so they took all the appliances home, back with them to the dorm. After Purim, they came to return the Keilim, and Rav Aaron said, no, he doesn't want them back. They were ownerless. He was only using them as hefker, and happy birthday, the Keilim, are yours. So if one has that attitude, that really is literally hefker, so then this works. And if one is going to employ this kind of method, he has to make sure to mean it. B'leiv shalom, that the Keilim are literally ownerless. Of course, after Yontif, one would have to go back and be toivel the Keilim. One would have to immerse them immediately, or not after Yontif, when the mikvah reopens. One would have to be careful to isolate these Keilim, or to label them that these Keilim have not been toiveled. And if he's going to pack it away for next Pesach, he has to label them that these Keilim have not been toiveled. The next Pesach, he'll toivel them. Or after Yom Tov, when the mikvah opens in Yirtzeh Hashem, he should toivel the Keilim at that point. Should he toivel them at that point with a bracha? So perhaps he should not toivel them with a bracha at that point. Because there is one opinion in the Achronim of the Chekin over Goyim, which is quoted in the Sefer Klifem and others, that if one does not acquire a utensil from a non-Jew, he acquires it from Hefker, it doesn't require Tevilas Keilim. Because the Tevilas Keilim is not so much only to convert the Keilim to become Jewish Keilim, it's to really distance them from the harmful influence of Machalas Asuros. So if the Keilim didn't come directly from the non-Jew who was cooking Machalas Asuros, it came through an intermediary of Hefker, of ownerlessness. So then if you acquire it from a state of being ownerless, so then maybe it doesn't require Tevilas Keilim, because you're not distancing it from the Machalas Asuros. It already was distant from them, from the harmful influence of Machalas Asuros in its state of ownerlessness, and therefore perhaps it doesn't require Tevilas Keilim. Most poskim do disagree with this position, or Tzvi Pesach Frank and many others, but perhaps to be chayshish for this suffix, at least with regards to the making a bracha on Tevilas Keilim, we would say suffix brachas l'kula, and to be toivel them when the mikvah reopens, perhaps without a bracha. However, one final thought, perhaps just like Tevilas Keilim is in order to distance us from the harmful influences of Machalas Asuros. Of course, all of Pesach really celebrates distancing ourselves from the harmful influences of society around us. The Meshech Chochmah tells us that we were redeemed from Mitzrayim in the source of 4 things, as the Medrash tells us. Shaloshinu Hashamam, L'shaynam, Malbusham. We didn't assimilate into the culture that was around us, and perhaps in Etzachus, says the Meshech Chochmah, we have 4 kaises of wine at the Leil HaSeder, 4 cups of wine, and it's specifically wine, which of course, wine that's touched by an Oved Kakavim, we are not permitted to drink, because the wine symbolizes the fact that there is somewhat of a distance in the way, the way that we conduct ourselves, and perhaps some of the harmful influences in the society around us. The Meshech Chochmah continues, we even raise our cups in the middle of the Haggadah. We raise our cups with a cup of wine. This is what has stood for us from generation to the next, and preserved us and preserved our viability and our continuity throughout the generations, is the cup of wine, which symbolizes perhaps sometimes those lines that we have to draw between ourselves and the harmful aspects of society around us. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, if we use this opportunity of where we're, we're isolated in our homes, but we're reorganizing our homes for Pesach, and perhaps reorganizing our life as we go back to life in Yom Hashem soon. Just as we're reorganizing it, literally, we should also perhaps reprioritize the things that we do in life. Perhaps make sure that we are drawing the proper boundaries between ourselves and the harmful aspects of society around us, which is one of the themes of the Yom Tov of Pesach and the mitzvah of Tevilas Keilim. And Emir Hashem, if we do that, we will be zaycha to make the most of every opportunity, even the challenging and difficult and dark times. And Emir Hashem, if we do that, may this taka be the footsteps of the coming of Mashiach, and we will be able to see quickly. With the coming of Mashiach, Tzidkenu, the binyan by Shlishi, Amen.